Hello, here's Broadcasting House from the 13th of October. I'm Paddy O'Connell. Thank you for clicking on us once again. If you're listening in the future, as we mention every week, please remember don't enter the quiz. Although do please let us know your views on the question of the Union Jack and the Union flag. BBC Radio 4, it's 9 o'clock. Good morning. This is Broadcasting House, and I'm Paddy O'Connell, alongside Neil Sleet, who'll be reading the news. The headlines. A powerful cyclone has caused widespread damage in eastern India, but an evacuation operation seems to have kept casualties to a minimum. The World Bank has warned of a very dangerous moment for the global economy if the United States defaults on its debts. And should it be Union Jack or Union flag? We've an official ruling at last on what we can all say, wherever you are. Much more on that later. Before 10, Malala and the Taliban are united on one issue: drones. Owen Bennett-Jones reports on deep divisions in Pakistan over the weapon, including support from within the country. And we also have, for this morning's programme, a diary of a drone pilot.
You've just walked out of life and death. Every decision you made was either somebody living, saving somebody, or somebody dying.
Also, triumph from tragedy at the Greek National Opera. Treat from Andrew Bomford, I promise you, who's reporting from Athens. And in Twitterati land, the hunter becomes the hunted as the MP meets the man who tweets as him.
We are on the edge of our seats.
And here's
the door is opening.
On the papers, Tim Bentinck, Baroness Bakewell and Professor Sir Martin Evans. Now to the BBC News with Neil Sleet.
The biggest evacuation operation by the authorities in India appears to have limited the number of casualties from the most powerful cyclone to hit the country in 14 years. The storm has caused widespread flooding and destroyed homes across a swathe of eastern India, but nearly 1 million people in the states of Orissa and Andhra Pradesh were moved inland before it made landfall last night. At least 5 people were killed, mainly by falling trees. Sanjoy Majumdar reports from Orissa.
India's east coast is recovering in the aftermath of Cyclone Pailin. Throughout the night, heavy rain and strong winds battered much of the coast, but the intensity of the storm has now weakened. Disaster relief officials say there have been few casualties so far, but there's no power in the cyclone-affected areas and communication lines are down. There's also been widespread destruction with trees brought down and houses destroyed, but the extent of the damage will only be apparent in a while. The authorities conducted one of the largest ever evacuations in India's history, with hundreds of thousands of people moved from areas along the coast. One reason why many believe that the loss of human life appears to have been minimal.
Politicians in the United States have been warned that failure to end their dispute over the country's budget would have grave consequences for the rest of the world. Talks are continuing in Washington as the deadline for a deal on raising the government's borrowing limit approaches. Both the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been holding their annual meetings in the city. The IMF called for the US to take urgent action to address the uncertainties created by the budget row. Last night, the president of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, said time was running out.
We're now 5 days away from a very dangerous moment. Inaction could result in interest rates rising, confidence falling, and growth slowing. If this comes to pass, it could be a disastrous event for the developing world, and that will, in turn, greatly hurt the developed economies as well.
The Chancellor, George Osborne, and the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, have begun separate but simultaneous trade missions in China to promote British business. Mr Osborne will be announcing one of the largest ever British-Chinese joint ventures, a 20% stake by a Chinese state-run company in the business and retail park being built at Manchester Airport. The Irish government says that from mid-December it will no longer be bound by the terms of its international bailout. In 2010, the country borrowed €85 billion from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund after the collapse of its biggest banks. As a condition of the emergency loans, spending cuts and tax rises were introduced, contributing to a recession which ended last month. Speaking at his Fine Gael party conference in Dublin last night, the Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, said the government was on course to retrieve the country's economic sovereignty and independence.
Yes, there are still fragile times ahead. There is still a long way to go. But at last, the era of the bailout will be no more. The economic emergency will be over.
The Children's Commissioner for England, Maggie Atkinson, has called for an independent review of the care provided to disabled children. She said that although many families had rights to welfare payments and practical support, the income often didn't cover the additional costs of caring for a disabled child, and some couldn't afford basic necessities. In the past half hour, Germany's Sebastian Vettel has won the Japanese Grand Prix for Red Bull. His teammate Mark Webber was second and Romain Grosjean in the Lotus third. Vettel missed out on sealing the world title as his closest championship rival, Fernando Alonso, stayed in touch by finishing fourth. Lewis Hamilton retired from the race after getting a puncture. An official ruling on what we call the British flag at any given time, whether on land or sea, has been given to this programme. It's been provided by the Flag Institute, the organisation which keeps a register of national and regional flags in the UK. As Jane Peel explains, choosing between the Union Jack and the Union flag has been somewhat problematic.
According to the Flag Institute, which has carried out legal and historical research, there's never been a definitive pronouncement on the correct title. The Institute's experts say that in the absence of any specific designation of a name, both Union Flag and Union Jack may validly be used. The news may come as a shock to those who are convinced that it's a Union Jack only if it's flown by the Royal Navy. But the general public, who almost universally refer to it as the Union Jack, can carry on doing so in the knowledge that they've been right all along.
Jane Peel reporting.
Neil Sleet reading the news, and the Chief Vexillologist of the Flag Institute is sitting in the corridor behind me. All ears for your own opinion listening to this, because what on earth does the Radio 4 listener think about the Union Jack is a question on our minds this morning. We'll answer that live with your help before 9:30. Let me begin, though, with a first-hand account this morning of a man who operated American military drones, and we're doing so to reflect a remarkable few days in which both Malala and the Taliban condemned the weapon. Malala, who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, told President Obama, who won the award years ago, "Drone attacks are fueling terrorism, innocent victims are killed in these acts, and they lead to resentment among the Pakistani people." For almost a decade, US drones have targeted militants in the country's tribal areas. There have been more than 300 strikes there, bringing estimates of up to 3,000 deaths from monitoring organisations who are looking into it. Washington won't give us its own figure. In parts of Pakistan, drones have nicknames based on sound. Have a listen to this. Some think the deadly weapons sound like these, fruit flies, and call them as such. Others call them buzzers. This week, the leader of the Taliban in Pakistan told BBC News that he wanted to engage in peace talks with the Pakistani government. Hakimullah Masood has a $5 million bounty on his head. He's accused of thousands of deaths. He had a simple message for the government in Islamabad. If you want peace, stop the drones.
For the ceasefire to be credible, it is important that drone strikes are also stopped. You can clearly see that the government of Pakistan bombs innocent tribal people due to pressure of America to make America happy to earn dollars. Peace deals failed because of the government. Drone strikes conducted by Americans were backed by Pakistan. Then the Americans pressed Pakistan to start ground operations in these areas, and Pakistan complied.
At home, Clive Stafford-Smith, the director of Reprieve, the organisation that campaigns about justice in international law, has said that the use of drones by the CIA in Pakistan is illegal and is an international crime. He's campaigned against their use alongside cricketer turned politician Imran Khan.
If they were so accurate and vital, we should be winning the war. Neither the US is winning in Afghanistan. We certainly are not winning in Pakistan. So what are these drone strikes achieved? This never happened. An ally bombs an ally. It's totally counterproductive. It's caused more militancy. All it does is it causes collateral damage, it causes anti-US, and guess who gains? The militants.
As well as deadly results for people targeted on the ground, there are effects for some who operate the missions. Research by the US Defense Department shows that drone pilots based at remote locations, some suffer from depression, others from post-traumatic stress disorder. For this morning's programme, we have a rare insight into what a day at work is like for a drone pilot flying Predator missions into Pakistan, Iraq and Afghanistan.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Black, retired Air Force MQ-1, or Predator pilot, as everybody knows the name. Got about 1,500 combat hours in the Predator. Currently acting as a consultant in the UAS, the unmanned aerial system industry. We flew regular shifts, 3 8-hour shifts during the day. So get up in the morning and head off out of Las Vegas and head up north to Creech Air Force Base, where we were doing all of our ops at the time. Just stop by, grab a Starbucks, and hit the road. And it was a 45-mile drive up there for me from where my house was in Vegas. And it was a good opportunity to actually put your game face on. A little bit of a transition from living in a regular civilian atmosphere and going up to being in combat. And that was the nice thing about Creech. It was far enough away. There was a bit of a separation between one reality and the other. It looked like a typical squadron. Everybody would show up for their call, and we would have a briefing first thing in the morning, or first part of our shift. What was unusual about our particular mission is that when you got into a box, is what we called them, the GCS, the ground control station, when you stepped into one of those, you were flying an airplane that was already flying. You were taking on that mission and continuing what was going on. One particular mission was a brand new mission that we were doing, had some political sensitivities to it. And as we were transiting up to go to that mission, on the computer screen where we communicate with each other, and 90% of our communications are done over the internet, I got a whisper from somebody. Don't know who it was, but I'm sure it was an authorized whisper. He said, "Don't screw up, the president's watching." And pucker factor went up a little bit on that one. Once that message came through, obviously you sit up a little straighter in the chair, make sure everything's put in a little bit better, make sure everything's exactly the way you want it to do. I don't know if the president was watching or not, but you want to make sure you're doing it right, and you make sure your professionalism was top notch at that point. When you're sitting in the box flying these things, you lose sense of the fact that you are sitting in Nevada. You get so into what's going on. You're talking, most of the time we're talking on the computer. One particular mission that I was on, the convoy that I was with had been ambushed, and everything had gone down except for a handheld radio that they had. As he's keying the radio and talking to me on the radio, I can hear the bullets whizzing over his head. And you completely lose track of the fact that you are sitting in a Connex box, sitting in Las Vegas. All of a sudden, you're in the middle. You're pitch in the middle of this battle. And everything's going off like, hopefully, you want it to go, and you're talking to the inbounds. You're talking to the forward air controllers that's trying to get on scene. You're talking to the guy that's being shot at. You're trying to coordinate with the Pentagon. You're trying to coordinate with the Combined Air Operations Center there in Qatar and get assets into these guys. And it is a total immersion. It's astounding that your brain can all of a sudden leave where you are and you're in Afghanistan helping these guys. And what is a real shock is right towards the end of that. I mean, we finally had them secured and planes were dropping ordnance as they came in. My particular portion of that mission was over, and all of a sudden the door opens on the box, and the next pilot and sensor operator walk in, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not in Afghanistan. I'm still in Las Vegas. It's extremely strange. It's very strange. And then you get in your car, and you end up driving the hour back home to Las Vegas, and you've just walked out of life and death. Every decision you made was either somebody living, saving somebody, or somebody dying. And you walk into your house, and you're trying to figure out whether your daughter's going to wear a blue tutu or a pink tutu. And the disconnection is astounding. It's amazing.
Those are the reflections of Bruce Black, recorded for this morning's programme. We've one final reflection from you, from Owen Bennett-Jones from the BBC's World Service. He's just returned from Pakistan. He took me on a journey through 3 of the country's major cities and the differing opinions people have about drones.
Lahore, the capital of Punjab, a city where there are big homes for the elite, with very sophisticated parties, highly cultured people, very elegantly dressed, having their drawing rooms filled with cocktail parties and the like. And if you go to that group, they are vehemently anti-drone. They will tell you, these are Imran Khan MPs, Nawaz Sharif members of the National Assembly. They will all tell you that these drones are a recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda, that they kill many, many civilians, that they've been going on for years now, nearly 10 years, and that they haven't damaged the Taliban. So, very strong feelings against drones in these circles in Lahore.
Let's head from Lahore to Islamabad. How do we get there? And once there, do we see any difference of opinion?
We go on the new motorway, 4.5-hour drive through the salt ranges of Pakistan. Virtually empty, this motorway, because they have a toll on it. So none of the lorry drivers want to use it because they're all saving the cash, go on the old GT road.
What speed can we do?
They have police guys about every 20 miles, the whole way, with a speed gun. They sit there on a deck chair with an umbrella, got the speed gun out just around the corner so you can't see them coming, and boom, you get done basically 2 or 3 times every time. It's 120 kilometres an hour, theoretically. So you get to Islamabad. Let me tell you, there'll be, for instance, I went to a dinner party with a lot of the leading TV anchors, big TV journalists. They're now stars in Pakistan, and they'll be sitting there over a, liquid dinner, and they'll be saying, look, these drones, they're not so bad. They'll say, well, I talked to one guy, for example, who's just come back from Waziristan. This is where most of the drones are dropping. He's saying there are 15,000 to 20,000 Taliban militants there. I mean, it's an incredible force in a tiny area. They are terrifying everyone. And he is saying, look, I can see the case for these drones. But on TV, he will never say that. He would not dare say it. He'd be accused of being pro-America. He'd be afraid of upsetting the Taliban. He'd be going against this national consensus there is against drones. So he's very, very careful what he says on TV, but privately over dinner he'll be saying, frankly, I can see a case for them.
So these are people who are able to travel inside the tribal areas, and those are run by people who want a parallel state, who felt the war on terror was infidel. We're not able to go there ourselves very much.
True. I mean, I've been over the years, but now it's difficult. There's always conflict going on. Foreigners can only go in with basically official state protection, and you go in with, soldiers all around you, and so it's very, very difficult to get proper access. Pakistanis can go in. I mean, it's extremely dangerous to do so, but they do it.
And those are the people you speak to. They've travelled in, they come back saying, actually, they're targeting the Taliban, who themselves target Pakistani citizens. That's the sort of message you're hearing.
Yeah, and if you go up to Peshawar, so that's another 2.5 hours on the motorway, and they just extended it, and you can go up there. So now Peshawar is basically a city which is surrounded by militancy. I mean, within the city, the police are dying every day. You get a dead guy from the police, IEDs. As you come to the city edge now, there are roadblocks, ISI, the intelligence agencies will be there checking everyone's papers. And you go there, and it's absolutely fascinating, because the closer you get to these tribal areas, the stronger the support for the drones. I mean, it seems absolutely incredible to a Western audience, I think, that this could be the case, that people nearer the place where the drones are landing are more in favour of them.
And are they telling you this directly?
No, because you can't go there. So all this is through people I've known over the years. I'm talking about senior bureaucrats, probably the most senior journalist, I think you describe him as, in Peshawar, who's in his office with an incredible setup, with stringers arriving from all over the tribal areas, giving him information. And he is sitting there and telling me that if you ask the tribal people what they think of drones, they will say, look, these Taliban, they are now painting graffiti in blood with the severed limbs of their victims. They are making people blindfolded sit on bombs and laugh as they blow them up. I mean, they are so depraved, some of these people. And they're terrifying everyone. And when a drone comes down and kills some of them, the local people are happy about it. Some of them say, we want more drones. And so that is a very difficult thing, I think, for a Western audience to understand. And I asked 4 people I trust who are very familiar with the tribal areas the precise question, would you say a majority are for or against drones? And they all 4 told me, there is opposition to drones, but a majority in the tribal areas are probably in favour.
This is difficult to comprehend because here's the facts of it. At least 3,000 deaths. We don't know the exact number. No one's pretending those are all militants. They're obviously including civilians. Piloted by people thousands of miles away, a new form of warfare. The jury is out, is it not, on whether or not that's helped bring the Pakistan Taliban to the table in the past few days, or whether it simply brings recruits to the Taliban.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, you can say they're illegal. You could say they're dishonourable, which a lot of people up in that part of the world think, that these Americans who are using these things don't come to the battlefield and risk themselves. So they're seen as a dishonourable weapon. So there are lots of things people have got to say about them. Have they brought the Taliban to the table? Well, the Taliban don't like them. That is for sure. And it is their top demand now in this dialogue that they want these drones stopped. And that's because it's hurting them. So, the dialogue process is there. The government, I think you could really have to say that the initiative for it came from the government side. They've got all the political parties behind them on this. The dialogue process, they say, is going to start. The bombs, though, are still going off. People are dying in really significant numbers. I mean, just in 3 days in Bashar, hundreds dead in bomb attacks from the Taliban. So it's a very precarious process as to whether it can work. Drones are a fascinating issue because they do divide opinion very, very strongly. You'll find people who are vehemently opposed. You'll find people who really think they are helping, and there the debate lies.
And that's just a flavour of it this morning, with thanks to Owen Bennett-Jones, and I'm sure we'll be returning to this in coming weeks. It's 9:20. We'll take you to Greece to a story of a thriving national opera in the next few minutes. We'll come home to talk about our flag. Now I'll just look back a little bit at events of the news. 9 missing episodes of Doctor Who were discovered in Nigeria, which is normally said Nigeria. The Vatican pulled a new papal medal after it misspelt the name of Jesus. And then there was this, a quote from the week that is now our quiz.
Until now, we've known little about their home. Not much to see on the surface, but down below, they dig a labyrinth, an underground bunker that's been key to their success.
He's missed it! He missed! Oh my God! I don't believe it! He missed that!
You're dealing with a wild animal, subject to the vagaries of weather and disease and breeding patterns.
What happened there? He missed that!
We're giving away a hand-carved Runcible spoon this week to win before the end of the press review, or to say what you like anytime. Use our webpage or email bh@bbc.co.uk. So far, most of our inbox is about my next item. It's time to end dispute over the Union Jack, according to experts who register the flags of the UK. You're now at the last night of the proms at the Royal Albert Hall. There among the banners and streamers is the famous UK flag. And is that someone you know waving it? But what do you call it? The Union Jack or the Union flag? By convention, we're told the Jack flies on board ship with rules on where and on which type of vessel. The Union flag is found on land, flown, waved, draped or worn, depending on taste. You can even put it on a plastic stick made in China. The two names, flag and Jack, have long been conflated, causing argument and letters to Radio 4. But the Flag Institute, which advises both the government and the United Nations, hopes to end the debate this morning with our help. They've got new findings they're showing to you and me first this morning. The Chief Vexillologist is Graham Bartram. Welcome.
Good morning, Paddy.
Did you find that very stirring?
It was, yes.
So the argument has been the Jack flies on a specific ship, on a specific place, and the flag flies on land.
Well, that's what some people say, but in fact the two terms have been used throughout history completely interchangeably. There are royal proclamations that say Union Jack, there are royal proclamations that say Union Flag, and sometimes when they say Union Jack, they're referring to the land, and sometimes when they say Union Flag, they're referring to sea. So I think it's up to you to decide what you want to do.
Give me a quote from history in your new document that proves that the Jack and the flag were interchangeable terms hundreds of years ago.
Okay. Well, in fact, neither term was used when the flag was first created. They weren't really referred to as either way until the 1630s, and the flag was in 1606. But, well, here we are. Whereas I am informed that the masters of several merchant ships have presumed to wear the King's Jack without leave, I require you to examine and inquire what merchant ships either do, have, or lately wore the King's Jack.
Well, that proves it was Jack. You haven't proved that it's Jack or Flag with that quote.
The same king, this is James II, said, I desire you will give notice unto all commanders and masters of shipping belonging to the subjects of the king, that henceforward they forbear to wear the flag of union.
So in the same document you have Jack and Flag.
Well, actually, they're two separate documents, but they're by the same king.
And what date?
1661 and 1666.
When did it become convention for vexillologists to prefer Jack and Flag as two distinct items or two distinct designs?
I think it's probably in Victorian times that they actually decide that certain vexillologists decided that it should be properly called one thing in one circumstance and properly called something else in another circumstance. But I think the Victorians were very keen on having rules about everything.
Well, so are some of our listeners, Graham. And what are you doing to these rules?
Well, we're not doing anything to them. We're just saying these rules are made up.
By you?
No. That they've been made up by just people writing one thing in a book, and people then read it and say that that's the law, when in fact it's not the law.
Are you seeking to do what the Oxford English Dictionary did with literally, which was to say we could use it figuratively? You're backing the public. If they say Jack, that's a Jack or a flag.
We're backing the fact that the flag has no official name, and you can call it a flag or you can call it a Jack, and which one you use is entirely up to you, just as somebody might call you Paddy or somebody might call you Patrick. Neither one is being nasty to you or being wrong. Or.
But I mean, just on the serious issue of what we should... If you're a source on this, from now, you're going to publish a new document based on some historical findings, and you're going to say, end this debate forever.
Yes, basically, this is a question that comes up a lot, as you mentioned, and our Chief Executive, Charles Ashburner, has actually asked our legal advisor to go back and look at the historical context for this and produce a paper. And David Lister did that, and very sadly, he actually passed away before it was published. But we're now going to be publishing that in the next month or so. And
you've given it first sight to us. Will you come back and take some questions from listeners?
My pleasure.
If you're listening and you want to, wave a flag at Graham, please do. A quick unrehearsed question from me, Graham. Name the US state that has a union pattern on its state flag.
Hawaii.
Correct. Well done. That wasn't rehearsed. It's 27 minutes past 9. Do comment if you wish. An MP has come face to face with the man who poses as him online after the two were confused on the radio. Jacob Rees-Mogg renounces Twitter, the online message board for people with many opinions, often held at the same time. But a mystery man's been posing as the Tory MP, tweeting Byzantine remarks. He briefly fooled beekeeper Martha Carney, who also hosts The World at One here on Radio 4. The men agreed to meet for this morning's BH.
It's taken all sorts of amazingly clever people in, really intelligent people who one wouldn't have thought would be taken in by anything, like Martha Carney, of whom I'm a great admirer, who was taken in on air.
And talking of people causing trouble on the backbenches, my favourite tweet came this morning from Jacob Rees-Mogg, serial rebel, of course. He says, my phone is very much on.
Don't forget, Martha, I think that's a spoof account.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go.
Were you listening to that?
No, I wasn't, but I have listened to it subsequently.
I mean, let's just look at some of the words written in your name.
An Olympic uniform should consist of light blazer, flannel trousers, spats, stout socks, optional cravat, and boater for men. So not quite my view of what an Olympic uniform should be like.
Is it close to your view?
Well, I wouldn't include spats.
We have got your Twitter alter ego standing by in another room. Are you prepared to meet him?
I'm very much looking forward to meet him. When it first happened, and I first came across it, I was quite worried about it because I knew people would believe it, and I thought it might be a series of perhaps unpleasant opinions that could be quite embarrassing for me. As it's gone on, it's actually been incredibly amiable. It's a little bit silly, but there's no great harm in a little silliness in politics.
Let's see if we can get him in. Tom, my colleague's going through the screen.
We are on the edge of our seats.
And here's
the door is opening. And in he comes.
Are you Otto?
I am.
Otto.
Nice to meet you.
Well, this is Jacob
Hello,
Rees-Mogg.
Jacob.
Hello, how do you do?
Hello, how do you
very
do?
nice to meet you.
And you.
Do have a seat.
Thank you.
I feel that you two already know each other.
We are, in fact, the same person.
We are. It's like a doppelganger effect. I think it's quite dangerous to meet, isn't it? I've been stowed away in a cupboard.
I know. They've locked you in a cupboard.
It's
But I'm
like
very
Julian
glad.
Assange.
Well, at least you're not in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Well.
Otto, are you wearing a disguise and using a false name?
I am sort of wearing a disguise. I had to go to Sports Direct to get a hat.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, are you wearing a disguise of any kind?
I'm very carefully disguised, yes. My false moustache, though, has fallen off.
If you could perhaps read out the biog for Jake Rees-Mogg.
My Latin is not very good, I'm afraid. Esne volumen, in fact, Martha Carney did this much better. Esne volumen in
toga and solum tibi libet me videre.
You want to translate that?
I think, does it mean, is that a scroll you've got in your toga, or are you just pleased to see me?
It is, yes.
Where did you get that from?
From the internet, I'm afraid. I cheated.
Have you enjoyed being Jacob Rees-Mogg? For a start, you call him Jake. I don't think you've ever been called Jake in your family, have you? Or...
Not if I could possibly avoid it.
Politically, we probably disagree quite fundamentally. Although I have got Stockholm syndrome because I've been amongst so many right-wing commentators on Twitter. I have had to bat off so many loony left-wing people that I do find, it's like a method actor. You do find yourself, I find myself getting incredibly irritated with sort of left-wing trolls and quite often end up blocking them.
Does this mean anything to you?
I do understand the lingo just about, yes.
The famous one that got us into this extraordinary meeting was it My Phone Is On? During the shuffle. The shuffleette, I think we call it, don't we?
Yes.
We don't really call it a shuffle, do we?
It was a bit of a shuffle, wasn't it? A soft shoe shuffle.
A soft shoe shuffle. You said that my phone is always on.
That's right. And then, as often happens with these things, you suddenly notice you've got lots more Twitter followers, which normally means that somebody famous has retweeted it. I think I've done you a service in some respects. Until today, I've never actually really talked about it to anybody. So I hope the satire is still in there somewhere.
I mean, you've taken in... Some of the followers of yours include Grant Shapps MP. He's the Conservative Party chairman, I believe, unless he's a fake. Michael Fabricant. Martha Carney follows you. Is there anything that's persuaded you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, to go and make the plunge and be yourself on Twitter?
The truth is, Otto does it much better than I can possibly do it myself. He's more amusing and has many more followers than I would get. So I think I might as well leave him to it.
A Twitter storm, bringing us to 32 minutes past 9. John Wilson mails from a barge in northern France, which is just showing off, really. Please note that the Union flag or jack should never be worn, unless the Queen is aboard, which she may not be on that barge currently. We'll look ahead to the world this weekend with Ben Wright. Welcome.
Morning, Paddy. We will have the latest from eastern India, where a huge clear-up is now underway following last night's cyclone. Sean Ley is in China for us, where the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and the Chancellor, George Osborne, have just embarked on a charm offensive, hoping to drum up Chinese investment in British businesses and thaw relations after a meeting last year between David Cameron and the Dalai Lama provoked fury in Beijing. And remember this.
Oi! Oh, I'm glad you're here. This'll interest you. British gas shares. They come out in November. If you see Sid, tell him.
With a government scheme to make home ownership more accessible and the privatisation of a major public utility, we'll ask if there's an echo of the 80s in the air.
All that eyeliner for men in the 80s. Thank you very much, Ben, here at 1 p.m. It's Sunday, October the 13th. At the moment, you're listening to Broadcasting House. I'm Paddy O'Connell. We'll have the BBC News headlines now from Neil Sleet.
A powerful cyclone has left a trail of destruction in eastern India, with homes demolished and power lines torn down. Disaster relief officials say there have been few casualties because almost 500,000 people were moved inland in one of the biggest evacuations in Indian history. The World Bank has warned of grave consequences for the global economy if politicians in the United States fail to increase the government's borrowing limit. The Democrats and Republicans must strike a deal by Thursday to prevent Washington defaulting on its debts. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, and the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, are leading separate trade missions into China. The visits come after an 18-month chill in relations that followed David Cameron's meeting with the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. Red Bull's Sebastian Vettel has won the Japanese Grand Prix. He missed out on sealing the world title as his closest rival Fernando Alonso finished fourth.
Much to talk about to do with the Union Jack, Union flag. John Stanning takes issue from Winchester. Whether it's the Union flag or the Union Jack, it's not the British flag, as your reporter called it. There is no British flag. Now, the document that has been produced by the Flag Institute, John Stanning, says since its creation, the pattern of the Union flag has had many names, including the Briton, the British flag. John Stanning, look. You're in trouble with Graham Bartram. He's here before 10 to sort out emails from around the land. Come with us to Greece now for a tale of triumph in despair. The country's broke, but the National Opera has doubled its number of productions, taken to the streets, and soon will move to a new home designed by one of the world's leading architects. How has it done this? Well, that's what Andrew Bomford was wondering. And take a tip from me, turn the radio up and enjoy what follows.
In a rehearsal room at the Greek National Opera, the performers are warming up for their new production of Rossini's Cinderella. Like everyone in the Greek public sector, the staff here have taken pay cuts of up to 25%. Not easy for sure, but even so, I was surprised when I asked the artistic director, Myron Michaelidis, who took over here 2 years ago, to describe how it's been.
It was a nightmare. May I speak personally? I was director and conductor and artist director in Thessaloniki State Symphony Orchestra. When it has been announced that I became here artist director, everybody was asking me, are you crazy to go there?
So this crazy man took on the Greek National Opera, which was in debt by more than £14 million and had just had its annual funding from the government slashed by half.
The nightmare was the finance situation, the big debt and the bad balance. But now we are in very good way, and we are now receiving the good results of the last 2 years.
And these good results include reducing their debt by 75% and cutting costs. And the reward from the government? This year their funding was cut again by another £4 million. The Cinderella director, Rodula Gaetanu, is going through the moves for one of the key arias of the second act. She's Greek, but normally works at the Royal Opera House in London, and like anyone who's worked in the arts in Britain, also knows how to cope with spending cuts.
The Greek crisis, the cuts, they have been extremely substantial. In London, I would say it's a bit less, but the mentality and the way people are dealing with it is the same. It's like having an obstacle and trying even harder to overcome the obstacle. And in some ways, this makes us even more creative, because we have to do more with less.
So at the same time as reducing the debt and cutting the operating costs, the opera's embarked on a radical new way of taking their performances out of the concert hall and into ordinary public spaces here in Athens to try to connect somehow with the public. They call it opera in a suitcase. And here, in the meat market in Athens, is the scene of one of the most interesting concerts. It's a free, open-air concert performed one evening here in this fantastic vaulted space. And there is something rather operatic, actually, about the sounds of these butchers here ranged along the hall as they shout out the names of the meats they have on offer.
Ελληνικά κρέατα, ορίστε. Ελληνικά κρέατα, κύριε.
and even the car alarms joined in. And 2 weeks ago, they staged a free concert on the waterfront at the harbour in Piraeus.
There was a boat here, you will see. And it's like this boat danced a valse with us. So it was a really magical moment. You'll see now.
Vexillologist from the opera showed me an extraordinary video in which a passenger ferry behind the orchestra seems to be turning and spinning in the water in perfect time to Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers from the Nutcracker.
Oh yeah, the boat is moving sideways.
And
in
you
the
will
water.
see when the valse starts. I mean,
it's pirouetting.
Yeah, exactly. We call it the valse of the boats.
And this is a rare sight in Athens right now, in fact completely unprecedented. There are 11 cranes on an enormous building site, more than in the rest of Athens put together, where construction activity is largely dried to a halt. There are so many cranes here, they've employed an electronic anti-collision system as they swing slowly and majestically against the blue sky like great conductors' arms, creating a symphony of construction as they build a brand new home for the Greek National Opera and the National Library.
Και επιτρέψτε μου να πω και ένα καλωσόρισμα στα αγγλικά. Welcome to the visitor center of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Cultural Center construction site.
This week, a visitor centre at the construction site was opened to let people see this, one of the biggest construction projects in Greece since the 2004 Olympics. The £500 million design by Renzo Piano, the architect behind the Shard in London, will house the opera's new concert hall and, interestingly, bury it beneath a huge new public park on a hill linking a beautiful view of the Acropolis on one side and the sea on the other. It's being paid for by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, a charity set up by the Greek shipping magnate, and is in many ways a lifeline, not only for the opera, but also for Greece, according to the foundation's general manager, Ioannis Trochopoulos. So this promises a better future for Greece.
This is really the future we really want to give to the new generation, and what the project creates is a hope for the young and all Greek citizens that there is a change for a better future.
Back at the rehearsal, mezzo-soprano Irini Kariani, who's playing the part of Cinderella, told me about some of the free open-air performances she's been involved in, like a series of tributes to Maria Callas last month, who started her career here at the opera in the 1940s.
People was very happy, but also we artists was very happy because art is a kind of communication and generosity also. So it's something like a big embrace. You feel like to embrace a big number of people.
It's a big hug for the Greek people during a difficult time.
Yes.
And with that, back to rehearsal. The show opens in less than 2 weeks' time. And another big hug for Greece.
Well done.
Andrew Bomford in Greece, the Cinderella state of Europe, if you listen to his report there. It's approaching 10:15. Let's turn to the Sunday newspapers with the journalist Joan Bakewell, the Labour baroness, who recently opened the Shunga?
Shunga exhibition.
Shunga exhibition at the British Museum. Devoted to Japanese erotica.
Correct.
And Joan called it eye-opening.
Yes, it's quite beautiful and surprising.
Professor Sir Martin Evans is the Nobel Prize-winning scientist. He was the first to culture mice embryonic stem cells and cultivate them in a laboratory in 1981.
Chief, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Yes, that's not you, Sir Martin. That's the cartoon Pinky and the Brain. Have you ever heard about it?
No, I haven't. But there is, of course, a lot of interest now in trying to model the brain using supercomputers.
Well, we've got the right man in the Nobel Week. Welcome back. And Tim Bentinck is David Archer in The Archers. Here he is reacting to his daughter Pip's latest drama.
What the hell does he think he's doing?
David, don't get out.
Well, can't you see what
They're kissing.
What, he's kissing her?
It's a rare example of David swearing, actually being allowed to say hell. We're only allowed about one per year.
Well, that's quite enough. Let's ask you to go first, Professor Sir Martin Evans. You're in Cardiff for us this morning. It's polite. You're in the real world. What have you got for us first?
Well, I find it very difficult because I've had a quick rush through a huge pile of papers and I was very, very disappointed. I thought there wasn't much of huge interest this week. And I was surprised, very surprised. I would say it's something like The Dog That Didn't Bark, because in this last week we've had the announcement of the Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
And these are very important, and I would have thought would have mentioned, a few lines in the papers. In particular, is the Nobel Peace Prize has just been announced on Friday, and that was announced once again for not, the winner wasn't person or people, it was an organisation. It was the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And they've done this 25 times before. The Peace Prize people have gone to an organisation, European Union last year, if you remember. And the other hugely, highly expected winners in this case were Peter Higgs and Francois Englert, who were the people who predicted what is now known as the Higgs boson.
So I think you're telling us this is the intellectual stuff of the age, and the papers and our programme aren't covering it today.
Well, I think there's a few nice and interesting little bits there. There are personal bits like...
I agree with that. I think there should be more elucidation of what all these scientific awards amount to. I confess ignorance, but I also confess interest. So, yes, I could have done with some more information.
Interesting comment I'll just, before moving on, mention in The Observer. Catherine Bennett says it's good to let Malala be a teenager and leave her alone, give her space to grow, is one of the sort of comments on this, Professor Sir Martin.
Yes, well, I think that if you look, there is a lot about Malala, and of course she was predicted by many to be a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and she may be in the future. They take their time at the Nobel.
Quite right. You're speaking from experience.
But she is all over the newspapers, and I suspect that they may well have been pre-preparing these. And, of course, there's a book just come out, too.
Okay. Well, thank you for raising what's not in the papers. Let's turn to what is. Joan Bakewell, differing views on migrants. What papers are you looking at?
Well, we're in a dilemma, aren't we? The Sunday Telegraph expresses concern, the true scale of European immigration. There's a report out from Europe which says the number of EU migrants coming to Britain without a job increased by 73% in the 3 years to 2011. So this is an alarmist column, rather playing along with the idea that immigration is something to be feared rather than managed. And on the other hand, we have the other dilemma, which is a very sad picture on the front of the Independent, showing people being rescued from the sea because they're trying to get to Europe from North Africa. What a dilemma there is here. Do we sympathise? Or do we not sympathise?
Just in your language, you say alarmist. If you look at the Sunday Telegraph, it says more than 600,000 unemployed EU migrants live here with the cost of £1.5 billion to the NHS. Is that alarming or alarmist?
I think you're right to correct me. I think it is alarming, but I think we need to not stir up a sense of anti-immigration rather than find out how to solve it. I mean, The Independent says, while terrible events in the Mediterranean have shocked us, no one knows how to stem the human tide. And this is global. It's a global problem.
Tim Bentinck, The Observer, page 36. What's it on about?
Well, taking on this idea of a dilemma. I mean, another dilemma is this balance between a Big Brother society and the need to find out what the bad guys are up to. It's called Spooks and Secrets in the comment section of The Observer. And it's a debate between an ex-MI6 officer called Nigel Inkster and the civil rights campaigner Shami Chakrabarti, and both sides are very articulately argued. And it does represent this balance which needs to be had of, you've got to keep your eyes open for what the bad guys are up to, but at the expense of, if you're not careful, ending up with a Big Brother police state. I mean, he says this is not 1984. I've lived in a police state, and what we're talking about doesn't take us close to being one. And Shami Chakrabarti says she cannot agree that their covert activities are sufficiently regulated by law. I was sort of brought up with this, really. My father wrote a novel in the 1960s called Isowog, in which was called the International Society for World Government, in which the Isowog spies went out and found all the secrets worldwide and then published them to the world, and thus anticipating WikiLeaks. And also the Isowog spies were connected to a network of computers around the world which held the sum of mankind's knowledge. So he was quite far ahead of it. So I've been listening to this debate, all my life, and it carries on.
And do the three of you want to come off the fence, because the newspapers are attacking each other? It's an unusual chapter in our press, isn't it? The Mail and the Guardian and the Observer are attacking each other in print. Professor Sir Martin Evans, where are you on the debate between Big Brother society and the leaking of state information to show what the state's up to?
Well, I would tend to be on open access myself. I think that we've got to combine a public understanding of what's going on with as much information as can reasonably be allowed to be in the public domain. I understand that some of those so-called public may be our terrorist enemies, but a minority, and I think majorities have to work against the minorities.
I think we always have to be alert to what the secret state gets up to. I reported from East Germany when the Stasi were keeping records on everyone and no one knew, and that was a wicked and malicious system. We have to be alert to the fact of what is being learned about us and used against us.
And all we ever know about is what we read in the papers, unless we're party to political ears.
And we're reading more about it at the moment, and it's argued that that's bad and good. That's the debate that's been had in the morning papers. Thank you very much. Professor Sir Martin Evans, take us to the cartoon in the Sunday Telegraph.
Oh, yes, that's very nice.
Sounds like you left the room.
I just had to lean over and pick it up. It's a lovely cartoon on which goes together with their second leader. It's a cartoon showing the Industrial Revolution, showing smokestacks all over Britain, and then inefficient revolutions, showing windmills all over Britain. And of course, the debate is, are these wind farms actually useful, and have we put too much subsidy to them? They've come up with a figure that 1.1 million out of 2 million, I think it's billions, for the power companies have come from subsidy, not from energy that they've sold. And I'd like to just contrast this huge inefficiency of windmills and the other point is that really we can talk about building a high-speed train, maybe a bit more industrial revolution. But for about the same cost, we could build a barrage across the Severn, which would generate 3 nuclear power stations worth of power for nothing.
I think I'd take absolutely that point. Hark back again, to my old pal who was shouting about this in the 1970s, stood up in Trafalgar Square and said exactly the same thing. And he said nobody will listen to it. And he was going on about global warming in the 70s and said that nobody will listen to a word that he said until people start making money out of it. And that's precisely what has happened, that when you start making money out of being green, and the windmill farms, which in my view, peeing in the wind, really, the reality of what needs to be done.
That would be no good for the wind turbine. That would rust it. Let's turn to the post-Leveson Royal Charters with you, Joan Bakewell. We're in a pickle, that would be the word I would use. But
yes, well, of course, it's very irritating that we seem to have reached an impasse. I mean, a year after Leveson reported on hacking scandals, the politicians and the press are at loggerheads.
And what are you looking at there?
And, well, I've been looking at the The Independent, which has a huge coverage of the post-Leveson situation, sets it out. The proposal for a royal charter was drawn up by the government. I don't know quite why they went down the path of royal charter, but it's being opposed by the press, who have got their own charter, which has been was rejected by the politicians.
Give us a briefing, Joan. What have you read this morning that can help us out? Because I'm very confused about what we're going to do.
Well, we're all confused, and so are the politicians, and so are the newspapers. So I'm not in a position to guide you through this, except you can read on page 8 and 9 of The Independent a good background to it, or you can read Peter Preston in The Observer and get ahead of it.
Thank you for that. It's read and digest. Tim Bentinck, rugby in The Telegraph.
Good. Yes, well, that's getting onto the subject. I actually know what I'm talking about. Us England fans are all still recovering from the 33 trouncing against Wales, and so it was lovely to go and win in a red shirt, albeit the fact that we did have a few. So yes,
let's bring in.
Get onto it.
No, don't get on with it. Let's bring in Martin, who might be recovering from the other side. Martin.
Yes, very good.
Yes, very good.
I love the rugby, and what we really want is really good matches, really fair, honest, open matches.
And that's what we had when the Lions trounced Australia, which was a wonderful experience, yes. and nice to be wearing a red shirt. Our chap, Stuart Lancaster, has been down in Australia watching the All Blacks beat the Springboks, and saying that he says sometimes you use the phrase a different level, and it was a different level, and he's coming back so that England can play at a different level in order to be able to trounce the Southern Hemisphere in the autumn internationals, which will be a good thing.
And so, Martin, are you going to come out supporting Wales?
Oh, every time.
Of course you will.
Every time. We've provided some very good support to allow the Lions to do their job.
It was a fantastic match, and they were deserved winners, and we will have our revenge at Twickenham.
You said that.
We'll have a good match.
You said that in a very ominous way. Well, thank you all very much indeed for taking us through your highs and lows of the newspapers. We were listening to Professor Sir Martin Evans in Cardiff, and with me in London, Tim Bentinck and Baroness Bakewell. Thank you both very, very much indeed. All three very much indeed. Now, we've been somewhat snowed under on the question of the Union Jack and the Union flag. The Chief Vexillologist of the Flag Institute has released new findings to us for your consideration first this morning. The document will come out in a month. Graham, what have you read from the volume, first of all, of correspondence from our listeners?
Well, one person said that my example of flag of union wasn't a very good example for union flag, and asked if there was a better one. And there is indeed. In Charles I, in 1634, issued a proclamation which reads, "None of our subjects of any of our nations and kingdoms shall from henceforth presume to carry the union flag in their main top or part of any of their ships."
Yes, but that's not my point, Graham, that we've been snowed under with people on the question of the Jack and the flag.
And some people are still saying it's only right to call it a Jack when it's on a ship, and some people are saying, I've been trying to get them to stop being worried about this for ages.
Here's Jan Stafford drilling down into what you're saying. If Scotland votes for independence, will the St Andrews part of the flag be removed?
No.
Pardon?
No, because the flag was created in 1606, 100 years before the Union of Parliaments. The flag represents the Union of the Crowns.
So would it be appropriate then to insert a Welsh motif, perhaps a dragon?
Well, I think the Union flag as it exists today will probably carry on, but then whether England, Wales, Northern Ireland want to carry on using that as their national flag, I think is a separate question.
Here's William Langworthy. The Union flag is made up of 3 country flags. The Union Jack is flown on the bowsprit of a warship, has a white border. Hence we have 2 different flags because of the border.
The white bordered version is the Civil Jack, and is the one that's worn by merchant ships. And it has a white border because the proclamations say that they can't fly the Union flag or Jack on a ship. So they fly one with a white border, which allows them to get away with it.
Melvin Tisdale, we need to know the difference between the Union flag and the Jack because it's useful to know how knowledgeable someone is to get an idea of whether they know what they're talking about.
Well, he says we should retain the difference, but there isn't a difference to start with to retain. They're both names for the same object. So, and they're used interchangeably. So how can you retain a difference that doesn't exist in the first place?
Chris Portwine, what is a jack staff?
Nowadays, it's the small staff at the very front of a warship. If you look at the pointy end, you'll see a small staff that actually carries the jack.
If there's more on this, will you return?
I will indeed, if people are still interested in it.
Well, who can say? It's approaching the Archers. Thank you very much indeed, Graham Bartram. The weather. There will be rain at times across England and Wales, drier in North Britain. Now, the quiz answer was the Environment Secretary Owen Patterson's comments that the Badgers had moved the goalposts. The winner, Pete McKimmie in Aberdeen. The producers today, Tom Bigwood and Joshua Thorpe. The editor was Owen Phillips. Thank you for listening and goodbye.